Spring, 1815, Yorkshire, England. Castle Howard rises from the rolling hills like a vision from another world. 1,000 acres of parkland, 145 rooms beneath a dome that rivals St. Paul's Cathedral. Gardens designed by the nation's greatest architects. The 5th Earl of Carlisle oversees an estate employing 300 people, generating revenues that would equal £15 million annually in modern currency. But in the private library, account books tell a different story. The family holds 40 hereditary titles across 7 centuries, more than almost any bloodline in Britain. Yet the ink in those ledgers runs red. The cost of maintaining power, it turns out, far exceeds the cost of building palaces. How does the most titled family in England go broke while still wearing their coronets? Stand at the entrance to Castle Howard today, and time collapses. The Baroque facade stretches 850 feet across the landscape. That dome designed by Sir John Vanbrugh himself, an architect who had never built anything before he convinced the 3rd Earl to let him create this masterpiece. Behind you, gardens rolled toward temples and fountains. The Atlas Fountain alone required 40 craftsmen working for 18 months. Walk through the Great Hall, and your footsteps echo against Corinthian columns that soar 60 feet overhead. This isn't just a house. It's a statement in stone and mortar, commissioned in 1699, still rising from the earth 3 decades later when the 3rd Earl died without seeing it completed. The building costs consumed £78,000, roughly £100 million in today's money. And Castle Howard is merely the most visible asset of the Howard dynasty. The family name appears in the heraldry of kings. Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk, Earl Marshal of England under Henry VIII. Another Thomas Howard, the Earl of Surrey, poet and soldier. Catherine Howard, briefly Queen of England before Henry sent her to the scaffold. The Howards survived that disgrace, and 5 more centuries of upheaval by accumulating titles the way other families collect art. By 1815, they held the Earldom of Carlisle, the Barony of Dacre, the Earldom of Suffolk. Ancient claims to dukedoms forfeited and regained. 40 titles, some dormant, some active, all carrying weight in a society where precedence determined everything, from where you sat at dinner to whom you could marry. But here's what the architecture doesn't show you. Behind that dome, in estate offices and London townhouses, a financial structure is collapsing in slow motion. The same system that elevated this family to the pinnacle of English aristocracy is crushing them under expenses that compound with every generation. The bills arrive monthly. Coal for heating 145 rooms through Yorkshire winters, £3,000 annually. Maintenance on the dome after weather damage, £12,000. For emergency repairs in 1808, salaries for 300 estate workers, from the head gardener earning £200 per year to stable boys making £15. The London house on Grosvenor Square, because an Earl of Carlisle cannot avoid the social season without losing political relevance. Dowries for daughters, jointures for widows, younger sons who must maintain genteel appearances without inheriting the estate. The 5th Earl, Frederick Howard, calculates and recalculates. He's a liberal politician, a man of the Enlightenment, rational and reform-minded. He knows the arithmetic. The estates generate £45,000 per year in agricultural rents. Fixed costs consume £38,000. That leaves £7,000 for everything else: family living expenses, political campaigns, unexpected crises, and the endless grinding obligation to appear wealthy enough to justify 40 titles. How did it come to this? How does the accumulation of power become the mechanism of ruin? The answer begins in 1485, when the first John Howard rides beside Richard III at Bosworth Field. When Richard dies, so does John, executed by the victorious Henry Tudor. Most families would end there. But the Howards possess something more valuable than loyalty to a single king. They possess adaptability. John's son, Thomas, bends his knee to Henry VII. He swallows pride. accepts diminished status, rebuilds influence through service. By 1513, Thomas is Earl of Surrey again, commanding English armies against Scotland, winning the Battle of Flodden Field. Henry VIII rewards him with the Dukedom of Norfolk in 1514. This establishes the pattern: court service, strategic marriages, the accumulation of titles as rewards for political survival. Thomas Howard's son, another Thomas, becomes the third Duke. He marries his nieces to the King Anne Boleyn, then Catherine Howard, playing a dangerous game for family advancement. Both queens lose their heads, but the Howards keep their dukedom. They don't know it yet, but they're building a machine that will eventually devour their fortune. Each title carries obligations. A duke must maintain a household befitting ducal rank. An earl marshal must fund ceremonial duties. A baron with lands must support tenants during crop failures. These aren't merely social expectations. They're legal and customary duties, enforced by honor and, when necessary, by law. When Charles Howard, the third Earl of Carlisle, commissions Castle Howard in 1699, he's not indulging in vanity. He's fulfilling an aristocratic requirement. His grandfather had been executed in 1649 during the Civil War. The family had backed the wrong side, lost lands, spent decades recovering position. Now, with the monarchy restored and the family's titles confirmed, Charles must demonstrate that the Howards have returned to prominence. He hires Vanbrugh, the playwright turned architect, because Vanbrugh promises something unprecedented: a palace that will stand for centuries, announcing Howard permanence. The construction becomes a 30-year saga. Craftsmen from Italy arrive to create the frescoes. Stone comes from quarries miles away, each block hauled by cart. The dome, that magnificent dome, requires engineering innovation. Vanbrugh essentially learns architecture while building it, making expensive mistakes, tearing down and rebuilding sections. Charles dies in 1738 with the house still unfinished. His son, the fourth Earl, continues spending. The bills pile up like snowdrift against the northern walls, but stopping is unthinkable. An unfinished palace is worse than no palace at all. It suggests declining fortune, weakness, the beginning of the end. So the work continues, and the Howard strategy continues. Acquire more titles, marry advantageously, serve in government, build influence. Each success adds another layer of obligation. They didn't know it yet, but Parliament was about to change the rules of the game entirely. The true arithmetic of aristocracy lives in the spaces between the public ceremonies. It lives in the estate office at Castle Howard, where the controller maintains ledgers that never balance. Consider what it takes to operate this machine. The house requires 40 indoor servants minimum, a butler at £80 per year, 8 footmen, 12 housemaids, kitchen staff, a cook, 3 assistant cooks, scullery maids, laundry maids working in basement rooms most visitors never see, a housekeeper managing supplies, candles by the thousand, coal by the ton, lamp oil by the barrel. Outside, the invisible army grows larger. 60 gardeners maintain the grounds. Not merely mowing lawns, they manage the ornamental gardens, the kitchen gardens producing food for the household, the hothouses growing pineapples and other luxuries that demonstrate wealth. Stable staff care for horses used for transportation, hunting, farm work. Gamekeepers patrol the estate against poachers. A small army of maintenance workers repair roofs, clear drains, lime wash walls, replace window glass. Each of these workers represents a family dependent on Howard employment. When times tighten, you cannot simply dismiss them. Estate villages exist because of the big house. The Earl's obligation to his people isn't written in law, but it might as well be. Cut the staff, and you cut the local economy. The next election, tenants remember. Political rivals exploit it. The system creates its own gravity. You cannot escape without collapse. Now layer on the London obligations. The fifth Earl must maintain the Grosvenor Square house. During the social season, January through June, The family resides in London. This isn't optional for a politician. Miss the season, and you lose influence. Lose influence, and you cannot protect estate interests when Parliament debates enclosure acts, tax policy, or trade regulations. The London house requires its own staff. Entertaining costs spiral. A dinner for 30 political allies, £200. Multiply that by dozens of dinners each season. The Earl's daughters must be presented at court, requiring gowns that cost £500 each, gowns worn once, maybe twice, before fashion renders them obsolete. Then come the family obligations built into aristocratic structure. When the 5th Earl's father died, his widow received a jointure, a guaranteed annual income of £6,000 from estate revenues. She lives another 30 years, drawing that £6,000 yearly. The Earl's unmarried sisters receive annuities. His younger brothers need help purchasing military commissions or establishing themselves in professions that don't compromise family dignity. Daughters must be married with dowries substantial enough to attract appropriate husbands. What's appropriate? Another aristocratic family, ideally one with complementary titles or useful political connections. The going rate, £20,000 minimum per daughter. The 5th Earl has 3 daughters. The arithmetic turns brutal around 1810. Agricultural revenues, which fund everything, depend on crop prices. The Napoleonic Wars inflate grain prices, providing temporary relief. But rents are fixed by long-term leases. Tenants pay based on agreements signed years earlier when prices were lower. The estate cannot capture those wartime profits. Meanwhile, taxes rise. Property taxes increase to fund the war. When peace comes in 1815, grain prices collapse. Tenants struggle to pay rent. Some default. Evicting themselves, nothing. Empty farms generate zero revenue, and the political cost is too high. Behind closed doors, the 5th Earl makes decisions no Howard would previously contemplate. He sells the London house. He reduces the Castle Howard staff by 20 positions. He stops funding improvements to tenant farms. He borrows against future revenues, paying 5% interest on loans that will burden his son's inheritance. And he will not surrender the titles. Because the titles are what remain when the money runs out. They're the last asset, the one thing that cannot be mortgaged or sold. Or so he believes. The breaking point arrives in waves, not as a single catastrophe. First wave, 1815, the Napoleonic Wars end. Agricultural depression begins. Wheat prices, which reached 126 shillings per quarter during wartime shortages, fall to 65 shillings by 1816. Estate revenues drop by a third. The 5th Earl, aging and exhausted, watches his reforms fail. He's reduced expenses everywhere possible while maintaining appearances. It's not enough. He dies in 1825. His son, George, the 6th Earl, inherits Castle Howard and debts totaling £240,000, roughly £250 million in modern terms. George is 38, a career diplomat, utterly unprepared for agricultural estate management during a depression. He inherits not just debts but obligations, his mother's jointure, his sister's annuities, the expectation that an Earl of Carlisle maintains a certain standard. Second wave, 1832, Parliament passes the Reform Act, beginning the erosion of aristocratic political monopoly. The old system where great landowners controlled parliamentary seats starts crumbling. The Howards' political influence, the one intangible benefit of their titles, begins its long decline. George makes harder choices than his father. He closes entire wings of Castle Howard. He sells artwork paintings collected over generations. He dismisses more staff. By 1835, the once great estate employs 180 people instead of 300. The reduction saves £15,000 annually, but the cuts wound local loyalty. Political rivals spread stories. The Earl of Carlisle, richest man in Yorkshire on paper, cannot pay his bills. Third wave, 1860s-1870s. Agricultural crisis deepens. Cheap grain imports from America undercut British farming. Estate revenues dependent on agricultural rents crater. George's son, the 7th Earl, contemplates the unthinkable, selling Castle Howard itself. The estate agent's report is devastating. The house is magnificent but unsaleable. Who can afford to buy and maintain 145 rooms? The only potential purchasers are industrialists, the new money that aristocrats despise. And even they aren't interested. They want modern conveniences, better heating, practical layouts, proximity to railways and cities. Castle Howard offers none of this. It's a Baroque dinosaur, spectacular but functionally obsolete. The 7th Earl chooses survival over pride. He sells outlying lands, keeping only the core estate. He leases shooting rights to wealthy merchantmen he wouldn't have invited to dinner 20 years earlier. He opens parts of Castle Howard to paying visitors, transforming his home into a tourist attraction. His aristocratic peers view this as disgraceful. The Duke of Devonshire, visiting in 1875, writes in his diary, "Poor Carlisle, reduced to showing tradesmen through his house for shillings. What times we live in." But the strategy works barely. Castle Howard survives when dozens of comparable estates are demolished. The Howards retain their titles, though they've monetized everything else. They've discovered a truth that will define British aristocracy's future. You can keep the coronet if you're willing to commodify the castle. Fourth wave, 1882. The 7th Earl dies. His son faces even grimmer arithmetic. Death duties, inheritance taxes consume 10% of the estate's value. Every generation, 10% disappears into government coffers. The compound effect is devastating. The estate that could support 300 workers in 1815 can barely maintain 50 by 1890, and yet the titles persist. Earl of Carlisle, Baron Dacre, the hereditary claims accumulating dust in the College of Arms. 40 titles, representing 7 centuries of ambition, now attached to a family living in a fraction of their ancestral home, supplementing agricultural revenues with tourist fees and strategic sales. By 1918, when the 9th Earl inherits during World War I, the transformation is complete. He's an earl in name, commanding nothing like the power or wealth his ancestors wielded. Death duties have risen to 40%. Income taxes take more. The staff numbers fewer than 30. Entire wings of Castle Howard remain closed, unused, slowly deteriorating. The house survives partly through accident. No single generation faces a crisis devastating enough to force immediate sale, and no buyer emerges offering enough to make demolition worthwhile. The Howards hang on by their fingernails, trading away everything except the name. Today, visitors walk through Castle Howard on guided tours. They photograph the dome, the Great Hall, the gardens restored by 20th century investment. Many don't realize they're walking through a family home, not a museum. The Howards still live here, in private apartments the public never sees. The current generation, the castle is now managed by a private, charitable trust. Established by the family, has made peace with what their ancestors could not accept. Castle Howard survived by becoming something other than a private palace. It's a heritage site, a filming location. Brideshead Revisited made it famous globally. A wedding venue, an educational resource. The arithmetic finally works. Tourist revenues, event bookings, film location fees, and national heritage grants cover maintenance costs that would bankrupt any private owner. The house that nearly destroyed the family through its operating expenses now preserves itself by opening its doors to anyone with a ticket.